What's up, guys? Thanks so much for coming back. Welcome to episode 4 of my Depth in Imagery series. My name is Nick Wren. Thanks for coming back to the channel. And today we're actually talking about tools. We're talking about gear. We love gear. We love talking about gear. We're actually going to talk about a thing that you can put on your camera to give you more depth. Specifically, I want to talk about depth of field. And there's two main factors that you can utilize to create shallower or deeper depths of field. One is focal length. So the longer your lens, the more compressed the image becomes, which has a tendency to make the background look a lot more blurry, which is that depth between your subject and the background and the foreground. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. The other thing that I want to talk about is aperture, and that's kind of like how wide a lens can get and how much light a lens can let in to the sensor on your camera. Something to keep in mind is that the wider your aperture, the shallower your depth of field can be. And actually, side note, I don't think it should be called depth of field. I think it should be called field of depth. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about that? For the most part today though, I'm actually gonna be talking about aperture. That's kind of like the main focus of today's video, because it seems to be like the biggest differentiating factor among lenses and among equipment choices to try to create more depth in your image. And the basic rule is the wider the aperture, the shallower the depth of field, and the bigger increase in depth you have in your image. Now, something to keep in mind about apertures and having a faster lens, which means a wider aperture, is
pretty expensive.
That's just kind of a rule among lenses. Like the faster the lens, typically it's going to be a lot more expensive than your slower lens. But if you actually want to know like brass tacks, like right now I'm shooting on a 24-70 f4. This is my go-to lens. I use it for every single production I have ever done with this camera. That's actually not a joke. I really have. This lens runs around $700. If I wanted to get an f2.8 version of this exact lens from Sony, I'm looking at spending around $2,000. Now, I'm not gonna be dense about the whole thing. I know that there's a bunch of other factors that go into why a lens costs money, like coatings and build quality and other features like autofocus and image stabilization and weather sealing and all these other crazy things. But when we're talking about lenses, the biggest factor is a bigger aperture. That just seems to be consistent among all brands. So my question when I kind of thought about this was, what sort of hacks and tricks and workarounds can we do to sort of find that fast aperture holy grail without having to spend boatloads of money to try to get there? And I think I found a solution. Vintage lenses. This one is a Canon 50mm f1.4 that I picked up on eBay for, get this, $45. I spent $45 on a lens. And like I said, it's f1.4, which is so fast. This is easily the fastest lens that I own. I actually looked it up, and if I wanted to buy this lens for a Sony camera made by Sony, I'm looking at spending 30 times what I actually spent on this little lens right here. That's $1,500 on one lens. And this lens is actually a medium format lens that I got when I actually bought a medium format camera. I know what you're asking. Why? Why would you buy a vintage lens when you could just buy a more expensive lens and have it last forever? Well, I have my board and I made a chart. Super accurate camera lens graph that I made. Verified by science. So on this graph, I have quality and price. At the bottom of the scale, with the price, we have $1, and then we have $153,290. That is because that is the cost for 6 Arri Signature Prime cinema lenses. Those are the most expensive prime lenses that I could find on the market that were sold together as a new product. And with quality, we have a potato and Roger Deakins. For the sake of this, cameras kind of went like this. So they just got better and better and better and better and better. Lenses like this lens is from 1973. This is a 47-year-old lens. We have like higher end lenses from like Angenieux and Arri and Zeiss that kind of live over in like this area here. Call those crazy cinema lenses. They're like right there. And then you have like your pretty high quality middle ground stuff like your Sigmas and some of the modern offerings from Tokina and Tamron. Those guys kind of they kind of overlap a little bit, but they take up kind of the lower price range right there. You know, like Rokinons and like kind of Samyangs and all those off-brand stuff that kind of live in this like lower tier. And they, to be honest, like they're not, shit. From personal use, I've had a lot of quality control issues with those kinds of lenses. I don't actually recommend them. Then we come to the vintage lenses. And here's the interesting thing about vintage lenses is in modern housings with modern features, these lenses are still being used in high-end cinema. This lens is very similar in pretty much every single aspect as the Canon K35 cinema lenses. All of these movies were shot on the Canon K35s, which are remarkably similar to this little $45 lens that I have in my hand right here. So these lenses are very inexpensive, anywhere between 50 and 400 bucks, and very high quality. So they fall in this little sweet spot right there. That's where we want to live because we're not spending a lot of money, but we're getting a lot of high quality imagery. All right, so that's all well and good, but how does this 47-year-old lens stack up against the modern competition? Well, it's really cold outside, and there's also this little thing called a pandemic going on, and I don't have an ND filter that fits on this lens yet. So I filmed my cats. Just for good measure, I did also use this Mamiya 80mm lens inside of the test, just to give it extra level to the comparison. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that footage actually ends up looking like. The first difference that I saw when it came to comparing this lens to my modern lens that I have on the camera is that there was a steep drop in contrast from the vintage lenses. These old lenses, they have way less contrast than the modern lenses. And depending on your preference, that can be a good or bad thing. I tend to work with a lot less contrast in my image anyway. That's kind of the look that I go for in post-production. So personally, I think this is kind of great. The other thing that I noticed was that when I stopped down to f4 to match my modern zoom lens, the sharpness of the vintage lens went way up, like way up. Then I played around with the f-stops and opened them up all the way, and the footage from the Mamiya looked fantastic, but the standout for me, the absolute standout, is this 50mm f1.4 lens. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of in love with it. The reason I like this lens so much is because it was so easy to come by. It was not a difficult lens to find, and it certainly wasn't a difficult lens to pay for. Like I said, it was less than 50 bucks. Should you just buy vintage lenses and not buy any modern lenses? No! New lenses are easier to use, they are more reliable, and the biggest thing is the build quality from one lens to another inside of a manufacturer is completely consistent. Something that is kind of notorious about Canon FD lenses is that even on the same assembly line, one lens is not the same from another. With these modern lenses, you're basically paying for consistency and reliability. Also, not that it has anything to do with depth, but autofocus. These lenses don't have any autofocus, and as a one-man band, autofocus is key to the workflow that I do for basically all of my clients. At the end of the day, these vintage lenses are sick. They are so much fun to use. I love having a manual focus. I love having hard stops on my focus ring, which is so nice considering that I shoot with Sony lenses, which don't. And they're all metal, they're super compact, they give you the full frame look. They're fun tools, man. They're really fun tools. And I'm definitely gonna be using them in my workflow. I'm not just gonna be sticking to autofocus because the one thing is that this tool is gonna allow me to create some new images that are still the same style that I like to shoot, but it's just gonna add that level of depth that I've been wanting that I haven't had. And that's what we're looking for, because this takes my ability to make a good image and turns it into my ability to make a great image. And if you know anything about me, I'm all about going from good to great. That's all I ever really want to do. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, and I hope you did because I had fun making it, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell, do all the good stuff. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Cheers, guys. This is actually the last video of 2020. So, Happy New Year. Thank God, this year's over. What do I next year?